we are ao vivo. So, have very nice afternoon, good afternoon, you all, girls, boys, everybody. This morning we start our meeting, and this time we have the pleasure to receive Rui Santos, my friend, Esther Sejong, I'm so sorry, Esther. And we are all here again with Professor Sergio, and now with the company of Belchior. Thank you all for coming. And let me check if the translation is working well, because this morning was a mess. A lot of problems at the same time. Was very interesting experience for me. And well, but let me tell you one thing. My friend Barbara wrote me saying that I must take care to don't ignore the goals. So yeah, and she's right. Now I'm seriously speaking. The gender agenda is something very important in our institution. So I'm so sorry, girls, ladies, so for my mistakes this morning. So let's correcting everything. Let's start again. So I also need to say that Ecoando Sustentabilidade, this platform where we are right now, is a very interesting program of our institutions that is spreading science inside our society. It's a pleasure to provide this mix of extension of our universities and opportunity to reach out even our country and our people, in fact. So thank you very much again. Belchior, they are all yours.
Thank you, Paulo, for introducing me. Welcome everyone again. Welcome to this afternoon session. My name is Belchior Gonçalves. I'm a PhD candidate in tropical marine sciences at the Federal University of Ceará. And now I have a pleasure to introduce our afternoon session with an honor to receive 4 speakers with expertise in marine forest research. Dr. Esther Sejong, Dr. Rui Santos, Dr. Paulo Horta, and Dr. Sergio Rossi. To begin this session, we will start with Dr. Rui Santos. He is a professor at the University of Algarve, obtained his PhD in biology at Dalhousie University, Canada. And his research lines were about coastal vegetation, algae, seagrass, and salt marsh, human impacts on coastal systems, and functioning of ecosystems on the goods services they provide. His talk will be about the introduction to the seagrass forest of the world. Enjoy it.
Okay, thank you, Belchior. And thank you for inviting me, Paulo. It's a pleasure to meet you here. So, I'll try to share my screen. Is it working? No?
Not yet.
Not yet.
But it will.
Yes.
Not yet.
Is it working now?
It's coming, I think, but not yet.
Can you see it? No?
No.
Okay. Let's try again. And now, can you see it?
No. Do you want to send me your presentation, Rui, just in case? Then I can share.
I sent you. Sent
to the school.
Not you, but
okay, to the organization. I will ask them to send me. If you have problem, if this problem persists, I will present from my side.
I don't understand what's going on here.
And B, the speed or the quality of the connection. Yeah, now it's coming. Your computer is coming. Your screen is coming. Yeah.
Can you see it now?
It's coming slowly.
Maybe the internet is not very fast.
Yeah. Maybe you will need to turn off your camera, and let's see if we have more quality. But Rui, you can just tell us a bit more about where you are, and then what we will trying to solve it. And,
yeah, I'm in Maputo in Mozambique, and that's why I'm having difficulties with this internet.
Yeah, and guys, Professor Rui is in the middle of the street. In fact, it's something really very interesting. Let me see if I can solve it. The students are sending us. Okay. So, Rui, if you don't mind, can we start with the stair presentation? Then while we are trying to solve this question of your, because then I will do the upload here in my computer, and then we will start. Stair, are you there? Can you change the planet again? So, Belchior, can you introduce Professor Esther?
Okay.
And then
to introduce the Professor Esther Sejong, also professor at the University of Algarve. She is obtaining her PhD in biological science at the main university in the United States. Her research interests are in patterns and process-mediated marine genetic diversity, genetic biodiversity, population dispersal connectivity, environment genomic, and adaptive evolution in climate. Her talk will be about introduction to the marine algal forest of the world. We hope you enjoyed the presentation, and if you have some questions, you could put your questions in the chat, and at the last of the presentations, or at the last of all presentations, we have a discussion here about the main themes. Enjoy it.
I would like to explain that my presentation is going to be a movie, because recently, together with a consortium of people from all around the world, we made a movie about conservation of kelp forests around the world, and it has a very strong focus on South America, especially because of the problems of over-harvesting of kelp forests in Chile. So I thought this would be the ideal presentation to show you, because it's very visual, so you get to see presentation of problems in marine conservation related to kelp forests around the world from different types of continents, and the different types of threats and solutions that have been proposed. So I'm going to stop because it's a long movie. Please watch and ask your questions in the end. Please take note of all your questions. Thank you.
I think you have to share also the audio.
Okay. I will try to solve it. 1 minute. I'm trying to solve the problem.
Tem que compartilhar também o áudio.
Sim, sim. Eu vou compartilhar dessa vez o áudio, que eu acho que é por isso.
Um minutinho para você tentar solucionar.
Tá funcionando agora ou não? Não?
No.
Não, ainda não se ouve.
Tá funcionando agora ou não?
Não,
Não?
não.
E agora?
Não?
Esther, have you
Not yet.
uploaded? Have you uploaded the presentation?
Should I try to show it myself?
Because if you have uploaded the presentation in the same screen, you have
Yeah, what?
on the left audio to just share the audio to me. But I'm not sure if this is internet or it's a video that you gave to Paulo.
I have both. I don't know what Paulo is showing. I have the video and also the link to the internet. Paulo, are you showing
sorry.
from the internet? Yeah.
Sorry, Esther, I was not listening. What is the problem?
Are you showing from the internet or did you download the video I sent you?
The download of the video.
Should work.
Then they have to share also the audio.
I did that. I am listening here anyway. Oh, that maybe for that nobody is listening. I was in the other room trying to solve the problem of the audio. Again. And now?
No, now I hear your house.
Yeah.
Kelps, like mangroves,
Oh yes, now it works.
act as a barrier against tsunamis and storms and help to avoid
Okay.
erosion.
Maybe you wanna. Okay, just continue.
Do you think you need to start again? So
They also play a
we
key role in coastal
we have nothing with audio?
mitigating
Let's start again.
Not audio. Yeah.
the impacts of
So
storms
let's
and
start
heavy
again.
wave conditions.
Kelp Forest is
Is it working? Can you listen?
Yes.
Amazon
But-
is burning in Brazil at a record rate.
Terrifying scale of Australia's bushfire disaster is beginning to emerge.
Fleeing from the flames is just one of many animals around Australia.
But according to conservationists, today in North Borneo, they say that less than 20% of virgin rainforest remain standing.
People have been evacuated from homes and campsites near the Marseille region of France.
When forests on land are lost to fires, hurricanes, storms, or deforestation, the world's press sounds the alarm. Rescue teams are deployed. NGOs, activists, and governments wake up and send resources and funding. The world is in shock, yet united. At present, extremely valuable wild ecosystems are being decimated voluntarily. Amazing forests are disappearing. Yet little is said, and lots remains to be done. Species go missing, biodiversity is lost, and coastal communities suffer. Many have highlighted coral loss, and large-scale bleaching. Occasionally, some discuss the importance of mangroves and seagrass beds. Unfortunately, there is not enough awareness about an equally concerning issue: the loss of large kelp forests. These forests are essential to the life of the oceans and the planet. Scientists have recognized them as the most productive and vigorous ecosystems on Earth. Kelps are truly amazing, far more important than many believe. In fact, they should be compared to the largest trees in a rainforest, to a sequoia or an oak tree. Seaweed fossils show that they have been around for over 1.2 billion years. Kelps, like mangroves, also act as a barrier against tsunamis and storms and help to avoid erosion.
They also play a key role in coastal protection, mitigating the impacts of storms and heavy wave conditions.
Kelp forest is one of the blue forests that we have along the coast. It is a very important ecosystem. Just 1 square meter of kelp houses up to 100,000 organisms and maybe 200 to 300 different species.
In addition, kelps, like the plants on land, use photosynthesis to absorb CO2 and grow biomass. They can absorb carbon at rates between 10 to 50 times greater than the forests on land, making them a real climate solution.
The kelp is part of the marine vegetation, so it stores carbon in the same way that every plant on the planet does. So it's similar to the forest, so it grows and stores carbon in the standing biomass along the coast. So it's really an important part of the carbon flux, and it stores carbon from the atmosphere.
Our estimates are that a natural kelp forest can fix approximately 3,000 tons of carbon per square kilometer per year. So it's a lot of carbon.
It is now certain that seaweed can help reverse the damage done by fossil fuels. Furthermore, if technology continues to develop, kelp would certainly become the most sustainable and eco-friendly food source on the planet. 1 hectare of a seaweed farm can produce more protein than the same amount of land used for cattle.
We have big pools and we pump in carbon dioxide from the Southern Hemisphere's largest distillery and grow the seaweed really fast. We could do 100 tons on a hectare in a year of dried seaweed product from 1,000 tons of wet seaweed. And if you compare that to wheat, you'd get about 2 tons. So much faster, doesn't use fresh water. So a really sustainable way to get food, and importantly, really nutritious food.
These multi-level functions make seaweed an indispensable actor, not only for the survival of marine species, but for our own well-being. Unfortunately, kelp forests are vulnerable to environmental conditions and are directly exposed to human-related stresses. The impact of these threats has increased in number and severity in recent decades, challenging the resilience of kelp forests.
And when natural vegetation on land is destroyed to produce, for example, agricultural fields rich in fertilizers, etc., all the erosion that is caused by the destruction of natural vegetation, plus the excess nutrients that will be washed onto the sea, destroy marine forests in the sea. Marine forests need light, and very turbid waters with a lot of particles and turbidity are not suitable. So when we are destroying and affecting terrestrial ecosystems, we are destroying the habitat for marine forests in the sea.
As carbon dioxide levels rise in the atmosphere, more of the gas is dissolved into the oceans, making them more acidic. When combined with warming oceans, heat waves and pollution, this has a devastating impact on coral reefs and seaweed ecosystems. Sadly, many large areas of kelp in the world have now vanished. California has lost more than 94%. Tasmania up to 95%. Some areas of Norway up to 80%. And Canada around 67% of their kelp forests. Regrettably, many other parts of the world are suffering from a similar fate, including parts of Britain and Portugal.
And when I moved back to California, actually one of the things I was looking forward to the most was getting back in the water in those kelp forests. And when I did come back, it was really disappointed to see just how drastically the kelp cover had decreased. One of my favorite kelp forests on Catarina, which was larger than a couple of football fields in size, is completely gone. There isn't a single frond of kelp left over there.
So as a result, the macrocystis or giant kelp forests have now gone. Literally gone. 30 years ago, you could go in any of the little bays here off the east coast of Tasmania, and it used to be a bit of a pain because it used to be catching on your propellers on your little outboards, and it was a bit of a pain. It was everywhere, very thick, but now it's gone, completely gone off the east coast of Tasmania.
Imagine if 70 k's of forests of eucalyptus on land disappeared from Sydney, people would notice and would raise their arms and tell the government, fix this. The same thing happened, but underwater, and no one even knew about it. So that's the increasing awareness is one of the things that we want to do.
Simply astonishing that despite such awful global trends, some countries choose to disregard these dramatic consequences and instead advocate their nation as a wild kelp logging country. A recent paper by the FAO confirms that Chile is the #1 wild harvester of kelp forests, followed well behind by China, Norway, and Japan, who together do not reach Chile's volume. Chile alone accounts for almost 40% of global harvesting of wild kelp. This sounds particularly threatening when we know that Chile holds 1/3 of the world's macrocystis ecosystems and large extensions of other brown algae. Chile, together with West South Africa, have some of the only waters around the world that are actually cooling. But instead of helping kelp to thrive naturally, human extraction is reducing its stock.
Chile es una cuestión completamente humana, de explotación, del barreteo, que como le dicen, de estos bosques de alga.
More worrisome is that while other nations expand the farming of seaweed, Chile keeps exploiting natural marine wild forests and does little to develop farming. Chile's government agency Cernapesca and the FAO confirm that only 5% of total seaweed production in the country comes from aquaculture. In comparison, it represents only 0.1% of the total aquaculture produced by China. Future United Nations climate change conferences will be under constant pressure to deliver a legal framework for the preservation and restoration of the ocean's blue carbon assets. Countries such as Britain would need to show leadership. It has 26,000 square miles of underwater kelp forests, so twice the size of its land forest. However, most government policies are around reforesting land, while totally forgetting the importance of its 12th longest coastline in the world. The Sussex coast has lost most of its kelp, and other areas in the UK are suffering a similar fate as a result of trawling, pollution, and sediment deposit. Given its massive CO2 sequestration and the alarming rate whereby we are destroying these coastal habitats, protection of these blue carbon assets must be at the front of any agenda for both climate and ocean action. It sounds only reasonable that kelp should be incorporated into any law, agreement, or protocol when addressing climate change.
Países de todo el mundo tienen que comprometerse a proteger los bosques de alga, a cuidarlos. Esa es la primera tarea. Una vez que tengamos eso claro, podemos empezar a pensar en las actividades económicas, en la extracción, pero hoy día estamos partiendo al revés. Estamos partiendo por la extracción y finalmente por la conservación. No podemos proteger algo que ya está en peligro. Ese peligro además pone en peligro no solamente a la comunidad, al ecosistema, el cual vive y que está relacionado con estas algas, sino que también pone en peligro y los hace más vulnerables también a comunidades enteras, a gente que vive esos recursos, a gente que ya en muchos casos es bastante pobre y vulnerable económicamente, y que por lo tanto, perdiendo esos recursos, van finalmente a perder también actividad económica actual y potencialmente futura.
For centuries, seaweed has been utilized as a food source. The first cultivation began in Japan in the 17th century, and commercial farming took off in the 1950s.
It's an old industry. People have been eating seaweeds for millennia. You know, South America's had the original people there traveling inland to develop the Aztec civilizations, carrying seaweed in their satchels. It's been essential for humans forever.
Today, many products we consume or use on a daily basis contain seaweed. While it is often consumed as a direct food product in the East, Western countries consume it primarily after it's been processed into flour, powder, or more specific extracts.
So this is the processing plant for seaweed. We had to work out, how do we dry this seaweed? How do we make extracts from it? How do we process those? And that took a long time. It was all in the lab bench, and now from the test tubes it's come up to this scale. So this series of tanks is where we do different reactions and take out the different polymers from our seaweeds. And we get our bright green seaweed powder that goes into our products, but we also have a protein-rich fraction that we make in this system here, and we put that into our mueslis and snack bars.
Agar, carrageenan, and alginate are the most commonly used seaweed extracts. The secret to kelp's versatility is the algin, a complex carbohydrate serving as an emulsifying and bonding agent in industrial processes. The algin is extracted from kelp and used as a stabilizer and emulsifier in many food products like ice cream, yogurt, beer, and jam.
After we came up with the idea that the origins of kombucha come from kombu, which is a Japanese kelp, and cha, so kombucha, which is seaweed tea. And so really we're taking kombucha back to the origins, kombucha, seaweed tea.
Seaweed is also now considered a superfood, and its benefits as an antioxidant, an anti-inflammatory, as well as its anti-aging and anti-cancer properties are undisputed.
And we also, in this factory here, make extracts that we use in clinical studies for gut health and skin care and wound healing research. This is the extract from our seaweed that we use to make the wound healing products. So we use it as a bio-ink. We make it into a gel and we can 3D print it into a scaffold with human skin cells and grow full thickness skin tissue, because those cells are really happy on this extract and start to make collagen, elastin.
Nowadays, scientific research keeps expanding the use of seaweed to new industries like cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, textiles, agri-food, and more. Even though one of the most recognized uses of seaweed has been crop fertilization, a recent study by researchers at the University of California confirmed that supplementing cattle food with a particular type of red seaweed reduced their methane emissions by over 90%.
Well, there's great opportunity for seaweeds to help reduce enteric methane emissions of ruminant livestock. Then there are two species of seaweed that have been identified so far that are local to Australia and could potentially help with that. They're relatively hard to breed and harvest, but there are some vegetative growth methods that look promising. According to CSIRO, less than 1% feed supplement can eliminate more than 90% of the enteric methane emissions of ruminant livestock.
The demand for kelp has grown so much in the last 20 years that for most people it is no longer a matter of collecting wild seaweed on the beach after a storm has washed it out. The wild forests of kelp, Lawsonia bertiorana, or locally known as Huero Negro, and Lawsonia trabeculata, or Huero Palo in northern Chile, are in high demand in Asia and around the world. The high prices that have triggered a gold rush exploitation of wild marine forests will soon give the northern Chile Atacama Desert its marine extension. The wild forests of kelp, Lawsonia bertiorana, taking any potential income from tourism or fishing away from coastal communities.
Lugares con algas, con bosques de algas, se han transformado en verdaderos, no solamente lugares de ciencia, de investigación, de entender estos ecosistemas, pero también, particularmente hoy, y con el crecimiento increíble del buceo y de las actividades de ecoturismo, ha crecido interés para visitarlo, digamos, porque son lugares impresionantes donde se pueden encontrar distintas especies.
As the kelp forest is extracted, hundreds of other marine species go missing. Meanwhile, Chilean fishermen have become loggers and can now cut 1.5 tons of wet kelp and earn in excess of $1,000 for a couple of hours' work. They operate under government quotas, and although major irregularities do exist, like in any high-value commerce, their extraction is legal. Unfortunately, their most rapid and effective extraction technique involves taking the entire root or holdfast out. hence destroying the surrounding marine life. For many reasons, it is absolutely imperative that we protect our kelp forest.
Después del evento de extracción, ¿cierto?, de estas algas, que puede ser en las zonas de transición, o sea, en la zona intermareal, este huiro negro ocurre en esta zona donde hay más incidencia de la luz, por lo tanto su crecimiento puede ser más rápido y por ende su recuperación después de un evento de extracción. No así aquel que ocurre bajo el agua, que es el huiro palo. El recurso limitante luz, ¿cierto?, hace que estas algas crezcan a una tasa menor que aquellas que ocurren en zonas de transición.
And it's important to highlight that marine forests are not all the same. Just because we have a large biomass, a large area covered by large forests of macroalgae, they are different, as I explained, because their genetic diversity and their unique characteristics make them different from each other. And so once a population that is comprised of unique endemic genetic lineages disappears, there is no way of recovering it, because you can have lineages that become extinct, and we see this. If we can recover the biomass, but we cannot recover the evolutionary potential that was lost.
Today, we know that the Chilean government's advisors assigned quotas prematurely and without sufficient research. No one knew if those kelp forests could ever recover, or how long that would take. It is uncertain if a forest can be rebuilt to what it was before, as herbivores such as snails, slugs, and sea urchins tend to stop any potential regrowth.
Donde se hace esta extracción hay una menor cantidad de depredadores. Lo que hemos visto en nuestra investigación es que los erizos y los caracoles, que son herbívoros, consumen estas algas, limitando así más aún el acceso a la recuperación y el acceso, ¿cierto?, al crecimiento de estas algas.
Large extensions of former California kelp forest are now densely populated by sea urchins. While reforestation on land is undergoing a substantial expansion and has become common practice, the kelp reforestation remains in its research stage.
We figured out by doing experiments that the way to do it is to bring back parents, I guess, so adult reproductive seaweeds from nearby populations, and create these little forests in the areas that we want to restore. And we basically let them reproduce. Those guys eventually do so, and after 6 months, more or less, you start getting craybees or babies of this crayweed. They grow fine, they become reproductive themselves, and then they start reproducing, and those populations start self-expanding. And then what we do is, after a year or so, we basically remove the ones that we planted in, because those guys do not reattach naturally to the rock. So to plant them here, we need to put some meshes on the rock and so on, which we then remove, and we let those populations sort of like thrive and expand.
Our chance to intervene and restore the natural conditions are to use wave energy, solar energy, perhaps even wind energy, to restore natural upwelling, irrigate kelps offshore, and be able to regenerate the production. And our early trials last year have been really successful. We were able to demonstrate, first of all, in the Philippines, that we could upwell water, irrigate the seaweed, and we got 4 times the growth rate of the normal seaweed with deep water irrigation.
The scalability of kelp forest restoration is still a considerable challenge. There have been some successful experiments on a small to medium scale. However, a large global restoration seems to be, for most people, a rather long-term goal. Hence, it seemed only wise to stop wild logging until we can have an effective and economically viable way of replanting. Chile, contrary to many countries in the world, lacks an export limit for its marine biomass and kelp export, while the quotas have little or no control, hence encouraging further unregulated exploitation. Kelps are known as ecosystem engineers. They create, maintain, and modify habitats by substantially changing the chemical and physical composition of substrates. More than 150 marine species live directly under the Chilean kelps, or algas pardas. Kelps provide food and shelter. Kelp forests are natural nurseries to many fish species and invertebrates, such as krill and mollusks. Up to 100 species live around the holdfast alone, and several hundred species are indirectly dependent on it.
Los bosques de algas son finalmente verdaderos jardines infantiles de montones de especies que luego también se van incluso hacia otros sectores del océano. Por lo tanto, especies pequeñas se reproducen en ellas, crecen en ellas y luego se desarrollan. Si perdemos estos lugares, perdemos también entonces muchas especies costeras y muchas especies pelágicas.
Indeed, it seems inconceivable that two endangered animals, such as the sea otter, the smallest marine mammal in the world, and also the blue whale, the largest animal that ever lived on the planet, depend on kelp as the food for both animals develops around these forests. Around the world, 220 species of seaweed have commercial value. Its cultivation takes place in about 50 countries. Seaweed cultivation has now proven itself as a much more environmentally friendly process than fish farming. Its capacity for growing naturally with no feed, pesticide, medicine, or fertilizer has been widely recognized, making it the fastest growing aquaculture industry. We wonder today why Chile has not delivered on its promises to pursue the more sustainable and environmentally friendly route of farming seaweed. Its 6,400-kilometer-long coast, despite being sometimes rough and hostile, benefits from the planet's richest waters. It will most certainly present many opportunities. The FAO states that a significant issue with wild seaweed is the possibility of contamination by heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury. These act as a restraint on market expansion, especially in countries that place a high premium on food safety and sustainability. The FAO continues, farmed production is likely to continue growing as wild harvest stagnates or declines due to overexploitation, changing environmental conditions, and water pollution. It is estimated that in 2024, the global market value of seaweed will be more than double the 2017 market size.
A mí me gustaría ver en Chile que se hicieran más estudios, más experimentos, que así como se está explotando ahora, y la verdad es que se están cargando no solamente el güiro, sino que también todos los peces y los moluscos y los crustáceos que viven directa o indirectamente asociados a estos ecosistemas.
Farming could be carried out by many coastal communities, while also improving their standard of living. Like any business, this will require training, technical support, and funding. On the other hand, today's Chilean loggers would also need to accept dropping their income and abandon once and for all the destruction of the Atacama's ecosystems. That will inevitably bring poverty and ruin to their families, friends, and communities.
It was a great video.
Great, huh? Very nice. Hui, how are everything there? Are you okay?
We are okay.
Okay, so Esther, can we move on to the next presentation?
Let's try again.
Thank you. Have you some words about the video just to finish it up with the,
I think it was a nice summary of a lot of challenges involving kelp and other seaweed, because they talk a lot about kelp that's not seaweed. But we can discuss in the end, and now we move on to the next presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move, and I have here with me the WHOIS presentation, and I will present to you the seagrass world.
You want to try again? But you have to give me.
Do you want to try yourself? Just because
you have to give me permission to try to share my screen again?
Okay, it's with you.
Because I think I figured out this.
Seems your connection is better now.
No, I have a message saying that. Yeah, but an error message here saying that you must give me permission to share the screen.
I did. It's with you.
Six, permission to capture scripts to be granted. That's what the message I have.
Okay, I will transform you in moderator too. And well, this is the maximum I can do here from my side. Can you try again, please?
Okay, I'll try again. No. We have the same error message. Saying
just the
last
for the last time, and here you have the presentation with you again, the function.
Yes.
Can you try, please?
Again. Now I'm going to share. And I get the same error message, code 1136. Permission to capture the screen needs to be granted. Anyway,
Sorry.
you have the presentation there?
Yeah, I have. Everything is fine here. I will share with you. So just next, I will move forward. I will turn off my camera just to. Can you see your presentation?
Yes, okay, I can see it.
Okay.
So can we start now?
Yeah, please. Let's do it.
So, yeah. So let's go to this smaller seagrass forests, from the kelp forest to the smaller ones. But yeah, also very important, and some of the issues are the same as you saw in the video before. So next.
Wait. That's it.
Yes. So the seagrasses. So seagrasses. What's a seagrass? Many people don't know what's a seagrass. Next. So seagrasses are flower plants. So they are not like the forests, like the seaweed forests that we saw before. They are not like the seaweeds, because they are higher plants. So they have flowers and fruits, and so you can see here in the middle the flowers of a seagrass. This seagrass is Austral, and you can see inside this protected by the spathe. Yes, here you can see female flowers on the left, the carpels coming out, trying to capture the pollen, and on the right side you can see the stamen liberating the pollen. And the pollen is not individual pollen like in terrestrial plants, but you know, masses of kind of sticky masses of pollen. And here you can see the fruits of another species, Cimodosia nudosa, and the general morphology of a species with the rhizomes, roots, and leaves. So these seagrasses are higher plants. Next, please. So they are flower plants, and the taxonomy is they are part of the division Antophyta, and the class Liliopsida and subclass Alismatidae. That's the only subclass that we can find. Here on the left, you can see the biggest seagrass, the Analos acocoroides, and you can see the big flower on top, which is a major flower, impressive flower, and you can see the fruit below, which is very big too. You can, it's like it's the size of a hand. Next one, please. So this map, you can see the distribution and species richness of seagrasses. So seagrasses develop in tropical and temperate seas, in shallow coastal zones. Shallow because they need light. Actually, they need more light than the seaweeds. So they occupy shallower zones than the seaweeds. And we only have about 60 species of seagrasses in the world. And you can see the species richness. The darker the green is the higher species richness, and you can see the highest one is here in the Indo-Pacific, where there are about 12 to 15 species of seagrasses. And yeah, in Brazil, where you are, there's a few seagrasses only, like, and in Portugal, yes, we have three seagrasses only. Okay, next one. So here you can see the evolution of seagrasses. So the yellow zone is the terrestrial realm, and the blue zone is the ocean realm. And on the right side, you have the timeline. So like 1 billion years ago, you saw in this last movie that kelp forests have about 2 billion years. So there were a lot of seagrasses by that time. Sorry, a lot of kelp forests and a lot of seaweeds and a lot of algae. And so around that time, algae start colonizing the land. And you know that algae just developed, and the evolution line gave the land plants, and the angiosperms, which are the plants that where the seagrass is derived. You can see the order of Alismatalis there below. And then this particular group of plants, they came back to the sea about 88 million years ago. So this is like you saw the whales of the video before. And the whales are mammals that went back to the sea, just like the seagrasses. Seagrasses are higher plants that went back to the sea about 80 to 40 or 50 million years ago. And so there is just a few classes, just a few families of seagrasses. You can see there, it's only 4 families. So, yeah, next slide, please. So for them to go back to the sea, and remember, they were at the time terrestrial plants from the order Alismatalis. So on the left side, you can see the terrestrial plants. And the terrestrial plants, they use carbon dioxide from the air, so the carbon to grow, so the building blocks of living matter, and of course nutrients. And they went back to back to the sea, so they could not use the carbon dioxide from the air anymore. So they had to use the carbon, the dissolved carbon within the water. And the carbon, actually inorganic carbon, has 3 forms. You can see the CO2, dissolved CO2, bicarbonate, and also the ion carbonate. So they have to adapt to be able to uptake these inorganic carbon forms. The other thing they had to adapt is they had to adjust to the full marine salinity with these ions, the sodium, potassium, and yes, the ions. And the other thing, so for this, they had to evolve, they had to adapt to many different conditions. For example, and I can give you some examples here, they had the stomata, when the terrestrial plants had the stomata, and it's the stomata where the CO2 goes in, and of course the water goes out. So the gas fluxes occur through the stomata in terrestrial plants, and underwater they don't need this stomata. So in fact, they lost the genes for stomata. So this is one key adaptation. Others were like they had to expand the light harvesting complexes. And why? Because light underwater is attenuated. So they need to evolve better and more effective light harvesting complexes. The other thing was the cell walls. So the cell walls are from terrestrial plants because flexibility is the key characteristic to be able to stand the hydrodynamics. And the hydrodynamics are they develop much stronger forces than hurricanes. So under the sea, you have to be flexible so that you don't break. So they actually adapted, and they kind of adapted like the seaweeds. So they had to produce cell wall components like those that seaweeds produce, and actually that are, and you saw this in the video also, that they are used by humans, these phycocolloids like agar, carrageen, and stuff. So the seagrasses, they don't have these phycocolloids, but they have other similar ones that give them flexibility. Again, so other adaptations were they lost the exine, and the exine is the protection of the pollen grains. They They don't need this protection underwater. So they lost genes for the volatiles too. They reduce defense genes. They, for the salt tolerant, they had to adapt, I said this already. So many different adaptations that they had to evolve to go back to the sea. Next one, please. So, okay, so why am I bothering you with seagrasses? So why are seagrasses important? This is the next slide. So seagrasses are important because they provide important benefits to humans. And this is a scheme of the ecosystem services, like a classical division of ecosystem services. So these include the provisioning services when you use some kind of ecosystem product for food or for whatever that you use in industry or whatever. So the other class of ecosystem services are the regulating services, like regulation of the nutrient cycles, of the regulation of the CO2 cycles, the carbon cycles. Other kind of ecosystem services are the supporting services, for example, the support for biodiversity, and the other cultural services are, services that are linked to the, for example, tourism, and to the some research services are cultural too, like even other kinds of culture linked to the culture of the local populations. So these are the classic characterization of ecosystem services. I'm going to talk about some of these with, of course, focus on seagrasses. Next. Okay, so the first ecosystem service I want to tell you is about water purification. And water purification has many different components. And this was referred in the video too for seaweed. So seagrasses, they need nutrients to grow. They need nitrogen, so they need ammonia, nitrate, and they need phosphorus. They need phosphates. So they do the uptake of these nutrients. They will remove the nutrients from the water column. And this is an important ecosystem service. Why? Why is this important then? Remember that the coastal zone where this forests, this seagrass forest developed, they have a lot of nutrients from the human activities, namely the urban effluents and agriculture. These are actually probably the two main sources of nutrients to the coastal zone. And what's the problem with the nutrients? Well, when the nutrient concentration in the coastal zone, in the water of coastal zone, increases increases too much, like from some thresholds are passed. What's the problem? Next slide, please. The problem is that seaweeds develop, like seaweeds like these ones, opportunistic seaweeds, and this can be a serious concern, because these opportunistic seaweeds, they grow much faster. They are very simple organisms, much simpler than seagrasses, and much simpler than kelp forests too. And so they develop huge amounts of biomass that degrade very fast. And the degradation of all this biomass, it's very annoying for the tourists that use the beaches, of course, but can cause profound changes on the ecosystem structures. They can be responsible for the decline of seagrasses, and this happened in many places of the world. Seagrass meadows disappeared because of these blooms of this kind of macroalgae, so opportunistic macroalgae. Next, please. So nutrient removal was very important ecosystem service, but there are others. For example, oxygenation. So seagrasses, they use the light. Next one, please. They use the light and they produce oxygen. So photosynthesis, they absorb the energy of the light for photosynthesis and to capture carbon. And as a byproduct of the photosynthetic activity is the release of oxygen. And this oxygen is very, very important to maintain the coastal zone oxygenated. And you know that anoxia has been a problem in many zones of the world, in many coastal zones of the world. So seagrasses, and of course kelp forests too, but seagrasses, they produce a lot of oxygen. And so they oxygenate the water column, which is very, very important. The other thing, and this is relatively less known, is that seagrasses, they reduce the pathogens that are in the water. They reduce the pathogens for humans. And this slide you can see a paper, a recent paper that showed exactly this. So this paper was, this study was made in Indonesia. And as you can see in the graph, the x-axis, you have the shore, the seagrass flat, and the coral reef. Okay. And on the y-axis, you have the concentrations of a bacteria, which is Enterococcus, which is a bacteria that causes human infections. And you can see that the shore, when the seagrass is absent or the seagrass is present, which is the black and white circles, there is no difference between them. But when, of course, in the shore there is no seagrasses, right? So there is high levels in this study case, in study site, high levels of this bacteria. Now let's go to over the seagrass flat, the seagrass meadow. In the seagrass zone of the seagrass meadow, if the seagrass is absent, there is still a level of this bacteria, and the red line shows the limit for human health limit for this concentration of bacteria. So, but you can see that there is a big difference, like 2 or 3-fold decrease. We have seagrasses present. So in fact, seagrasses produce biocides, which control this and other bacteria, including pathogenic ones. But interesting thing here is that over the coral reef on the right side, there is also a positive effect of the seagrasses. So when you have seagrasses, the coral diseases are much lower, half. There's a 50% reduction of coral diseases when you have the seagrasses present. So this is actually very interesting and important, which is another ecosystem service, which is the improvement of the health conditions of the habitat, not only for the humans, but also for the environment. And actually there is the biotoxins, that some algae that produce biotoxins, and these biotoxins can accumulate in bivalves and be a major threat to human health. There's been some work that has shown that seagrasses also reduce the concentration and the development of this microalgae that produce biotoxins. This is actually very important for zones where there is a lot of bivalve production. Next one, please. So other services in this category of water purification is the problem of turbidity. So seagrasses, because they form a physical barrier to the column particles, to the water column particles, they trap these particles because the currents are very, very reduced within the meadow. So these particles are they go to the bottom, they sediment, and they get trapped in the sediment. And so the result of this is that the turbidity decreases in zones where there is seagrass meadows. If the seagrass meadow is not there on the right side, for example, if the seagrass meadow is destroyed or disturbed, what happens? It happens that all the sediment that was trapped, all the fine particles that were trapped in the sediment, they actually resuspend, they go back to the water column, and turbidity increases, and less light is available to the bottom, and reducing the possibility of developing natural meadows and healthy meadows. So this positive feedback is very, very important and is crucial it's crucial that seagrass meadows are not disturbed because of this. Next one, please. Now, other ecosystem services is the support of biodiversity. And this was also mentioned in the video before. There's a lot of organisms that depend on marine forests to lay their eggs, to protect the juveniles against predators. And so this is, and there is a lot of food in these meadows, in these forests. So there is the biodiversity support, this service is highly important. The biodiversity is much higher within the seagrass forests than outside. And there are many species, including commercial species, that depend on seagrasses. And this has consequences, economic consequences for us, of course. Next one, please. In this graph, you can see how on top of the top graph is the foraging success of the predators, those big fellows that you have on the right side and on the left side, the ugly fellows. So and on the x-axis is the seagrass plant density. So when the density is higher, the foraging success of the fish, they decrease. They clearly decrease. And on the bottom, on the graph on the bottom, you can see how the prey choice. So how the prey, or the small juveniles of fish, for example, they choose the higher densities of seagrasses to live than lower densities because they are more protected there. So this shows this protection factor of the biodiversity support. Next one, please. But there are other things, there are other effects of seagrasses on, for example, on fish. I'm showing you the results of a paper that was made in the Rio Formosa lagoon on the right side there in southern Portugal, where Ster was filmed in the previous slide, in the previous video. And here, this lagoon is very, very important, it's crucial for local fisheries. And here on the graph, on the table, you can see the list of commercial species, commercial fish species on the left side, and on the right side, inside this red circle, the square, you can see the survival enhancement of seagrasses, meaning that numbers higher than 1, the survival was greater within the seagrass meadows than outside the seagrass meadows. So the same species, and these are mostly juvenile survival, within the seagrasses, most of them, they have an enhancement higher than 1, meaning that they are favored by the seagrass. Their survival decreases within the seagrass meadows. There's a few that is the other way around, only 2 of them actually. But most of these commercial fish species, they survive more within the seagrass meadows. And in the graph below, you see the production of the fish. And interesting, the green one is the production within the seagrasses, and the brown one is the production outside in unvegetated sites. And you can see that in many species, the green bar is higher than the brown bar. So this means that the fish juveniles not only survive more within the seagrasses because of the protection, but they grow more. They grow more, than their growth rates are higher. And it's very important in terms of economical, in the economical perspective, because these resources, they grow more and faster because of the seagrasses. Okay, next one. Now, going to the problem of the CO2, the carbon problem. Of course, seagrasses, like all plants, they consume CO2. And because of that, they mitigate the CO2 increase. But as opposed to the big kelp forests, where this CO2, the biomass that is concentrated, the carbon is concentrated in the biomass, so the CO2 is uptake and develops big biomasses. This is where the carbon is. In seagrasses, because they are small plants compared to kelps, the carbon, most of the carbon is not in the biomass because the biomass is low. Most of the carbon is in the sediment. And actually, this carbon sequestration, the blue carbon, the carbon sequestration of seagrasses is very high, because the carbon, not only the biomass that the plants produce, but remember that I talked before that the particles of the water column were trapped and were stabilized within the meadows, and they became part of the sediment. And many of these particles are organic particles, so they have this particulate organic matter, particular organic carbon. And this carbon gets deposited in the sediments. And that's why, and this is a very important sink for carbon. It's called the blue carbon. Next one. And this is the color of the blue carbon. As you can see, it's not blue. It's actually black, and it gets brown when it oxidizes. This is the color of the blue carbon. So the sediment, this is where the carbon in the seagrass forests are. They are in the sediment, not in the plants like in the previous video. So it's within the sediment. Next one, please? And here are the two classical graphs that show on the left, the stocks, so the amount of carbon, and you can see in dark blue is the soil organic carbon, and the light blue is the carbon on the living biomass. So in the forests, most of the carbon is in the living biomass. In mangroves, there's a lot of carbon in the living biomass. We don't have a bar for seaweeds here, but the kelp forest, most of the carbon, if not the total carbon, would be in the living biomass. But in seagrass meadows, in the salt marshes, and in the mangroves, most of the carbon stock is within the sediment. The sediment is the real reservoir of carbon. And you can see on the right side the sequestration rates. So you compare the sequestration rates from salt marshes, mangroves, and seagrasses with the temperate, boreal, and tropical forests. And you can see a huge difference. So the sequestration rates of carbon are much higher in seagrasses. And why? Because of the carbon that comes not only from the biomass, the living biomass, but much of the carbon that we have in the sediment comes from the particles that are in the water column. So this is why there is a lot. I mean, the sequestration rates are very, very high, and also because the sediments of the seagrasses and salt marshes and mangroves, they are anoxic. And because they are anoxic, the composition of the organic matter is slower. So the carbon, it's not decomposed to CO2. And so that's why, like in oxygenic environments, and that's why the sequestration rates of these small plants are very, very high because of the sediment carbon. Okay, next one. Now, ocean acidification. This is another problem that was referred in the video too. Yes, the seagrasses consume, well, when the CO2 increases in the air, as you can see there, the pH increases because the CO2 gets dissolved in the water, and as a result of that, the pH decreases. And this is what we call ocean acidification. Can you click in the slide, please? Next one, yeah. So, but seagrasses, they consume CO2 for photosynthesis. So when they are consuming CO2, when there is light, the pH increases within the seagrass meadows. So this makes the seagrass meadows as zones where the ocean acidification is mitigating, and actually this ocean acidification may be a problem in the ocean, but in coastal zones where there is lots of seagrass, the ocean acidification is not such a problem. So calcifiers, for example, bivalves that are very important economically, can get sheltered in these coastal zones because of this effect on pH. The consumption of CO2 increases the pH. So this is why seagrass meadows are mitigators of ocean acidification. Next one, please. And you can see this, the results of a recent paper where this is clearly shown. So this was a work done in California, along the coast of California, with lots of sensors for pH in the zones where there was seagrasses and in those where there were no seagrasses. And you can see the distribution of values, the green bars, the green distribution of values, and the brown distribution of values. So the green distribution of values is the pH values within the seagrass meadows, and the brown one is outside the seagrass meadows. And there is a shift to the right. So pH gets really mitigated because of the seagrasses. So this paper provided the strongest evidence for what I just the ocean acidification of seagrasses. Okay, next one, please. Now, as kelp forests, seagrasses are declining worldwide. So this is a paper from 2009, a very well-known paper that look at the territories, the species all over the world. And the red ones is where there is decrease, the green is increase, and the yellow is no change. So you can see the decreasing trend is global, and it's a little bit everywhere. Next one, please. And if you do the account, the calculation of the net result of global seagrass losses from 98 to 2009, and this is also these papers. Next one, please. You can see that every hour we have 2 soccer fields that are lost. Can you click, please, Paulo, so that we see the soccer fields? Lost?
I'm doing that, but it's freezing. I don't know.
No.
Oh, now it's working.
Okay. So yes,
Oops.
so two soccer fields are lost every hour at the rates that were measured by WACOT in 2009. Next one, please. So this is, of course, very worrisome. This is a recent paper that that was done in Europe. That looked at the time series data of Europe, of the 4 European species, Zostronolta, Marina, Posidonia oceanica, and Cimodontia nudosa. And again, the red is the decline, and the green is the increase, and the yellow is the no change. So there is a 44 decrease of seagrasses and only a 21% of increase. Can you click, Paulo? Yes. And the calculation that you can do is that during the last century in Europe, there were a 30% loss. So one third of the European seagrass area was lost in the last century. Next one, please. And the causes for this decline were several. The early causes, like in the 1930s, was a disease, a big disease, the wasting disease that had terrible impacts in Northern Europe, in Denmark, and everywhere in seagrasses. But then, after that, there was water quality degradation, the pink line there, that increased a lot in the 70s, and then decreased because the water quality improved because of the European measurements, like the Water Framework Directive and the Habitat Protection, but mostly the Water Framework Directive. The extreme events, curiously, are increasing in the 2000s, and they are causes of decline, reported causes of decline for seagrasses, and also coastal modification and mechanical damage, which is increasing along the decades. Next one, please. So the question is, can we stop this decline? Is it possible? Can management reverse the global declining trend of seagrasses? And this is the last slide, and this is a positive message slide. And why? Because in this paper, we showed that the rate of change of seagrasses, and you can follow on the net rate of change, which is the black line. Okay, it was negative in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And this means that the area, the European seagrass area, was declining. But in the 2000s, there was a reversal of the trend, and the rate of change went to positive, meaning that in the 2000s, the seagrass area in Europe is increasing. And this is a very positive message. And why was that? Can you click again, Paul? Why was this? Well, this trend reversal was probably related to the management. So it is possible to reverse the declining trends. It is possible to do something, so people can have a role. And in Europe, what happened was that the HATS directive that indirectly protected seagrasses, and the Water Framework Directive that improved the water quality a lot, for example, decreasing the nutrients. And remember that nutrients, too much nutrients origin the blooms of seaweeds that can have the effect of declining the seagrass meadows. This was controlled by the Water Framework Directive. So in general, in Europe, the coastal water quality improved, and this occurred in the 80s and 90s. So as a reaction, probably in the 2000s, we have this reverse of this of the European decline trend, which is a positive message, and hopefully we can continue to do this worldwide. Next one, and thank you all.
Thank you, Rui, for the presentation. It's a great pleasure to see great news, because in these times it's difficult to, in some ecosystems, to have great news from the recovering, mainly in the vulnerable ecosystem from the human being actions. We're gonna to the next presentation. In the last presentation, we discussed all of it together.
Okay, just, I don't know, maybe we should ask to Rui, just because your space is a little bit different from all of us. Are you okay, or you want to answer some questions? Because you are not really in a safe place.
Oh no, the place is safe. No worries. It's just I'm just.
Okay.
Someone taking me away, just call the police.
Okay. So can we start with, or continue with Sergio?
People here are very nice and friendly. No.
Okay.
No, I'm under the sky, but it's not going to rain. I'm
okay,
fine.
so that's perfect. So you just need a beer or something like that.
I could have one. I could have.
Okay, if you can share, if you can just let me share the screen. I will try from my computer.
Yeah, I did that.
Bam. Now you're seeing the presentation. Okay. Let me just okay, so after these two first talks about the photosynthetic organisms that are macroorganisms in this case, that are making the forest of the seas, which are widespread all over the world, I want to take advantage of this framework to talk about marine forest, but especially marine animal forest, okay, which are another kind of forest or another kind of dimensional alive structure that is also widespread all over the world. In this case, you may find below, of course, the compensation point, so the point in which you cannot make photosynthesis, or you can do photosynthesis, but it's just equivalent to the respiration rates. So all these organisms that live in the shallow areas too, like for example coral or heterotrophic organism that share space with the photosynthetic organism, but also all those organisms which are below this point. And you have to think that in general here, to understand the rule of this forest of the sea in general, you have to think about these two guys. These two guys are engineers. As engineers, also architects, but engineers mainly, they just give you facilities and commodities. In some way, they facilitate your life. They give you, in some way, they give you tools to, to work, for your leisure, for living, for education, and so on and so on, from buildings to the plastic bottles that you are using, or furniture, and so on and so on. They are making, in some way, the framework in which human beings we are just living. if you take this into account and you understand the real role of engineers and architects, you will understand basically what Jones in 1994 was talking about. Jones, in a very brilliant paper, 1994 of Oikos, he talked about ecosystem engineer organism. He talked about those organisms which facilitate in some case or give to other organisms the possibility to, if you want to say in this way, a better life. Okay, they give shelter, they give, they structure in some way the habitat. They also interfere with the fluids, in this case with the air, and then also it gives a much more pleasant life to birds, for example, or to insects. They give food, they give lots of things. But when you think about it, and you think about Jones also talked about coral reefs. In the paper, there was not, he was not only centering or paying attention to these ecosystem, terrestrial ecosystem engineers, which are basically trees, shrubs, bushes, and so on, giving this three-dimensional life structure. He also talked about, in this case, phyllorganic seaweeds, and of course, in that case, coral reefs. Because marine forests that are widespread all over the world, they give us the sensation also to be very complex, or just showing a very complex framework that the organisms take advantage of. So the organisms that are within this framework take advantage. In fact, both Esther and Rui talked about this just complexity as an essential part to understand biodiversity and biomass production, for example, and also for other kind of services that are given. Phyllorganids, as we have been just a few minutes ago, it had been presented, are one of the most known ecosystem engineers. Also seaweeds, as Esther just presented in the video, and which were clearly, a three-dimensional life structure that is spread in many parts of the world, and it's giving shelter, giving food, and so on to the other organisms. Just share in some way, in part, share the habitat also with other kind of forests, which are those in which the passive and active suspension feeding organisms are the real promoters of this complexity, are the real, protagonists, if you want, of these three-dimensional life structures. If you take into account the meaning of what this is all about, you have to take into account that the marine animal forest are all these three-dimensional life structures that are similar to the vegetation forest, but composed basically by large metazoans like sponges, cnidarians, bryozoans, ascidians, and other sessile animal organisms in the ocean benthos, which are just structuring these ocean benthos. And you have marine animal forests everywhere. You have marine animal forests that go below a certain point. The most famous of the marine animal forests, if you want to see that, is the coral reefs, as I told you before, in which corals, in this case scleractinians, and other organisms like, for example, gorgonian sponges, may be mixotrophic. That is to say, they can share autotrophy and heterotrophy, and they can take advantage of the life in symbiosis with microorganisms like the Sylviodinaceae, the algae Sylviodinaceae, to just make this kind of three-dimensional life structures. However, and this is very important to understand, below a certain point, a certain depth, and it's not restricted to 50 meters. I put here 50 meters, but can be 30 meters or can be 65 meters, depending on the area of the world. These organisms become completely heterotrophic because they don't have enough light to survive, okay? And it's where the marine animal forests get the maximum splendor. A part of the coral reefs, of course, which are splendid and are magnificent and are never used, but you have to think that below that point, there are plenty of this kind of ecosystem engineer organisms that are making in some way life much better to many other organisms. And you have, for example, if you want to see in this way, something like shrubs or bushes, like, for example, the oyster beds or the mussel beds like this, which are also three-dimensional life structures that determine a much more complex interaction between the water column and the substrate. Also, you have tropical coral reefs, but in this case, for example, dominated by gorgonians, which is sadly is the trend in some parts of the world because of this kind of change that is becoming a reality in many areas of the planet. The mesophotic, which is between more or less 30, 35, 50 meters depth up to 150 meters depth. You have these coral reefs which still have some photosynthetic protagonists, but rely in many cases in the heterotrophic paths, we will see. And also other areas in which the marine animal forests are also splendid, like, for example, in Greenland, in the hard bottoms of Greenland with these gorgonians, these fantastic massive sponges that you find in the Antarctic continental platform, which is incredible, the size of these sponges, which are widespread in the Weddell Sea and in the Ross Sea, for example. Also in the Antarctic, this Merveilleuse Gorgonian, very primitive Gorgonian marine animal forest in these areas of the world. And of course, I want to just remember, even if it's a smaller one and it's not so large as in other places, the coral legionnaires in the Mediterranean Sea. Probably this kind of structures that you see that are maybe foliaceous, maybe branched, maybe massive, maybe combined, of many kinds of different architectures of these organisms, probably they were extremely common in soft bottoms. Not anymore, because of bottom trawling. We talk about a bit just later on. But you have to think that in the soft bottoms, there are many organisms that can withstand not only pennatulaceans, but other organisms that are suspension feeding organisms that promote this kind of marine animal forest. But in some way, they have been swept up. And probably also the most large scale and the most hugely distributed marine animal forests all over the world are cold water corals that we are now, during these last 2 decades, starting to understand and starting to just discover. In fact, if you see, for example, tropical coral reefs in shallow areas, you see the extension, which is wide all over the world. You see that there are coral reefs in all the subtropical and tropical zones, taking advantage of this kind of symbiosis between this microalgae and the animal. However, if you look carefully and you think about it, only sea mountains, presumably we have something more than like 100,000 mountains, have this in many of these sea mountains because of the topography, because of the interception of the main currents in the areas. They have marine animal forest, maybe 1,000 meters depth, 500 meters depth, 200 meters depth, or whatever. Okay, you have all these kind of three-dimensional alive structures present. Probably not in all the sea mountains, but most than probably in most of them. In fact, we don't know because we still don't have the complete picture. At the end, this marine animal forest has been recognized by the UCN in the last guide that is available now as the largest biome of the Earth. They're probably the most complex biome of the Earth. Taking into account, and this is very important, that marine animal forests have common trends, have common, how can I say, have in some way common structures that are important to understand, and that are you can find it, the functioning, you can find it that is very similar in several parts of the world. However, it's also important to highlight that these marine animal forests are very different one from each other. All are based in one principle. The principle is the autotrophic and heterotrophic feeding. In this case, beginning for the heterotrophic feeding, you have to think that suspension feeders in general, and especially those which are rely on the benthos, like for example, bryozoans, gorgonians, sponges, bivalves, ascidians, and other organisms which rely on these particles, feed actively or passively on the cestone that is around them. So this is one of the common characteristics of all the marine animal forests, because all the metazoans, all these cnidarians, porifera, and so on, need from the particulate organic matter that is present in the water column, even if they are symbiotic, even if they are mixotrophic, okay? And there is room for everybody, because they are specialized in a diet that is very different. They can eat, for example, bacteria, but others can eat even small fishes, fish larvae, for example, or they can feed on small crustaceans, or they can feed on phytoplankton. So the distribution of these organisms and the cohabitation of these organisms will depend on the food, on the currents, on the temperature, on the available light. And in the available light, I say that because in the surface, of course, there are many of them that in some way depend also on the light, like for example, gorgonians, scleractinians, anemones, or sponges that are present in the shallower areas of the oceans in most of the cases. In this case, in this particular case, they also intercept particles. Don't forget that. I mean, they need a part of the budget, could be 10, 20, 50%, depend on the organism and depend on the moment, depend on the depth, and so on and so on. They always need food coming from these particles that are in suspension. Is this why they are called suspension feeding organisms? However, some of them have these very small symbiotes inside that easy their life making the photosynthesis, as in this case, the plants. Plant now is a microbe, is a small, tiny phytoplankton cell that makes the photosynthesis, enrich in some way, taking the CO2, enrich that and gives oxygen to the mitochondria, to the own mitochondria, to the own respiration apparatus, and also to the animal. Okay, and it's benefited in some way, or benefits the growth and the calcification rate of this organism when it's present. Take into account that all this heterotrophic and autotrophic input, if present, this is why I put heterotrophic like a continuous line, and in fact autotrophic also a dashed line, because not all the organisms have this possibility. Not all the marine animal forests have the opportunity to be autotrophic. As I told you, below a certain point, there is no light and there is no ability to have this kind of energy input. However, all of them have also patterns that may be different and are different between taxon and species, but are very important to understand and are really quite common in, for example, the dispersion of the larvae, the dispersion of the new recruits, the colorization of the space, and so on and so on. So can be also envisaged as a thing that is a set of processes that are quite common between them. We have to understand the respiration, the growth, the reproduction, the excretion, the defense and secondary metabolites that are there, to understand the energy outputs that have all these organisms. So the marine animal forest, I repeat, have this kind of peculiarity, if you want, of this heterotrophic and autotrophic input, autotrophic when present, and have also certain trends which are or can be associated to the water column currents, water column temperature, water column light availability, and so on and so on and so on. Why are these forests of the sea so important in general, and in particular the marine animal forest? As the previous talks said, well, we have all these questions have been already mentioned, both by Esther and by Rui, both in the case of the seaweeds and the case of the seagrasses. Okay, you have to think that they act as barriers for hurricanes and storms. They also trap sediments, and in fact, for example, in the case of phytoorganisms, they are partly responsible for the regeneration of the sandy beaches. So they have a huge importance of this in the mechanisms that are involved in the dynamics of the coastal areas. They are also key for all these organisms that live within or with the marine animal forest, in this case, or in the forest, that shelter, search for food, and have this kind of interaction with this three-dimensional alive organism. And they also feed and shelter lots of commercial species of interest. Coral reefs, but also deep water corals, but also sponge grounds have been in some way described as nursery grounds, also as shelter grounds, as food grounds, and all this interconnection between the organisms that live with this ecosystem engineer and with this kind of organisms have been evidenced to be extremely important, the healthy status of these three-dimensional alive structures. So, in some way, they can also transform the hydrodynamism. Remember that, of course, if you have just not smooth surface, it would be not the same as if you have a rough surface and a contact of the water currents. Much more, the more diverse is the system, the more three-dimensional structures are present, the more complex is the hydrodynamics, and much more transformed is the whole thing. So they really act as also cycling and recycling of the organic material and inorganic material that is there. Is this why they can't be considered biodiversity hotspots? All the forests of the sea are biodiversity hotspots, but also the animal forests have the capability to recycle nutrients, and they also have this possibility to just give and clean, if you want, the system from particles or from nutrients that are present. Remember that, for example, an oyster bed can clean lots of particles that are present in the water column. So filtering actively all these particles, they can clean the water. Also, organisms that have inside symbionts may be or are interacting with the nutrients around them, not only the nutrients provided by the animal, but also the nutrients that are incoming from the water column. So they are active nutrient cycling organisms, and they are, let us say, within the framework of the biogeochemical cycling spectrum. The animal forests have also an importance for tourists and for people that is living there. They have from symbolic and spiritual importance to leisure importance. Many people that is working and is living and is growing near the marine animal forest and the forest in general, the marine forest in general, need from the forest just sometimes to, because of the beauty of this forest, because of the concentration of biodiversity of this forest, because of the singularities of this forest. The biodiversity and the biomass of this forest is essential to understand the attraction that this kind of three-dimensional life structures give to the people. And also, the animal forest, in the forest in general, but the animal forest we will see, act as carbon immobilizers, as carbon sequestration. We know it, of course, you have always seen the Amazonian forest, like for example, as a carbon sink and carbon immobilizer. You know perfectly that also salt marshes are involved in this kind of processes. And we know that many other plants are involved in this process, like for example, mangroves, or as said before, seagrasses, and especially, seaweeds, but especially seagrasses, because they trap not only the CO2 that is present around and in the structure of the plant, but also in the sediments. However, this process that is really clear and has been studied during the last 30 years in depth, and we know very well, and we just have notion and numbers about what happens, is not so clear for these guys. But these guys immobilize carbon, can make or have some rule in the carbon immobilization. What is the real rule of this marine animal forest in this kind of interaction with the, basically with the CO2 or with the carbon, and maybe in forms of particles? If we see this small graph, this small diagram, okay, we will see that that is taken from Barnes et al. And this rewriting from a paper that book chapter that recently published in a book. What you see, as you have an algal bloom, okay, let's simplify the system. You have an algal bloom that through the photosynthesis immobilizes carbon. This is directly or indirectly eaten by benthos, directly because there are many suspension feeding organisms that eat phytoplankton, or detritus derived from phytoplankton, but there are others that eat the zooplankton, which in turn eats the phytoplankton and the derived organisms of the microbial loop. So in some way, this portion that is eaten is transformed in growth. If you remember, there are many outputs. The outputs are the growth, the reproduction, the respiration, and so on and so on. One part of the carbon is fixed through the growth and is just immobilized in these structures. And a little part, probably a small part, is sequestered, let us say, brackets, please, brackets, forever. The important thing is, like in seaweeds. Seaweeds, for example, fix the carbon and they may stand for years or decades. In the case of the phanerogams, the sediment that is trapped and that fix this carbon inside the overall seagrass meadow may stand for thousands of years, of tens of thousands of years, okay? In the case of the animals, it depends on the animal. There are animals that immobilize during few years or even a year, for example, hydrozoan is ephemeral, or other organisms that may fix and may just immobilize this carbon for decades, centuries, or even thousands of years. In the case of the corals, in the case of the scleractinians, the calcium carbonate, this carbon is fixed for million years. Even if they can be considered carbon sinks, carbon sources, this is another problem. But the carbon that is immobilized in the structure, this carbon is then fixed for long times and long periods. So it could be interesting to preserve these organisms because they are, in this case, or allies. In this case, they are organisms that with us, with the trees, and with other organisms like seaweeds and seagrass, may facilitate our life. Now we have the tools in some way to see how many of these organisms are on the bottom through ROV, for example, or through other methods, like, for example, AUVs. With remotely operated vehicles, for example, we can make larger and larger and larger areas, trying to understand how much carbon is immobilized and how much carbon will be immobilized depending on the species, depending on the health status of the population, and so on and so on. And the methods, which are greatly improved during the last 10 years, are various and are all compatible with this vision that we have to have about the habitat distribution. Because one of the problems that we have, and this is a very big problem, is that even if we have all these methods available from organism, population, community, and habitat ecosystem approaches, from the smaller to the larger approach that we have in our hands, okay, to just make an approach of many things, but among others, the carbon immobilization and the presence of the biomass in different areas of the world. The problem is that if we take into account the habitat mapping, not the topography of the bottom, this is quite well known if you want, but the habitat that we know from the oceans, we have a very, very small quantity that is really truly mapped. And it's this Decade of the Oceans, in the United Nations Decade of the Oceans, one of the targets is to explore the oceans, not only from the biodiversity point of view, but also to understand what is the role of this organism in this carbon stocking or this carbon immobilization all over the world. If they are immobilizing, how they are working, and also what is the health status of these habitats, which wouldn't be easy, of course. This will be quite hard to do, because the methods, even if they have been optimized, needs lots and lots of money, as all the people that is working on the oceans know very well. And which are the main stressors and destroyers of this marine animal forest? In fact, this is the main stressor of the marine animal forest all over the world: bottom trawling. Yes, of course, warming, ocean acidification, sea level rise, they are really with other perturbations, like for example pollution, and as I said in the last talk, for example, alien invasive species, the growth of the nutrients and the expansion of the urban impact in many areas are local or maybe widespread stressors, direct or indirect. But you can be sure that bottom trawling is at the moment the real problem for the continental platform and the marine animal forest. It is calculated, that is the case calculation is made in 2002, I think is obsolete, that one third of the continental platform of all the world is trawled once a year. In many areas, the trawling is 2, 3, 10 times a year. In some areas, maybe 2, 3, 10 times a day. But you can be sure that this trawling has been destroying all the complexity. And now many of these areas have gone as providers of these ecosystem services. And you have only to think, as a comparison, if you put this kind of bottom trawling net in an area like the savannah to take elephants, giraffes, or take gnus, or take buffaloes, or whatever. But the same thing if you take into account that you are taking fishes, crabs, shrimps, and so on in the bottom. The very problem here is that you will be horrified looking at that and seeing how we destroy all to take some animals. In the bottom, waters 1,000 meters depth, 100 meters depth, 50 meters depth, whatever, they are making this kind of impact. You don't see it, so you don't care. Other problems are related with the energy transfer and climate change. For example, warming and acidification, how this is impacting, for example, in the bleaching, how this is impacting in the with the heat waves to the organisms that are living in the bentos, how this is affecting the transparency of the water stratification, transparency of the waters and the water the stratification, how this is affecting the whole cycle. And this is one of the things that has to be, in some way, has to be studied from several points of view. Okay, there are many other problems, of course, which are directly involved in this, let us say, transformation or destruction of the marine animal forest, like, for example, the coral bleaching, but also the extremely polluted areas in which you have too much nutrients loads, which make much more difficult for these organisms to live. And it's not new. You have to think that all these marine animal forests, as the other forests, have been changing over time. I just put this example that is from a paper from Ruth Thurston, in which she explains how the marine animal forest, in this case, the coral reefs, in the entire coral reefs, have changed over time in Australia. This case is Stone Island, and you have that in 100 years, more or less, all this complexity has disappeared because of trampling, a simple trampling process. Simply because the people is just going to the coral reef and just making activities like walking, like harvesting, like fishing or whatever. So most of this, and with a simple, in this case, much more complex in other cases, simple just action, you may transform completely an habitat, or you can completely transform a set of populations. So at the end, you see that over the story, marine animal forests have not the same rule as they had. And this is important to understand, as the other marine forests have lost their capability to help us, because all these organisms help us. Here what you're seeing are fishermen harvesting. They are coral harvesters in Sicily, okay? And they are just going, making snorkeling with goggles and taking a large branch of coral. In this case, red coral, which is a precious coral that was, and it is, very valuable for jewelry, for example, and other applications and other kind of industries. So in that very moment, these organisms were very large. Look at this. This is a red coral belonging to the marine animal forest of the Cap de Creus, okay, which is in the northern part of Spain. And this is a tree. This is a fantastic tree, 1978. This has been harvested in 1978. It's a fantastic three-dimensional alive structure, if you want to see as this. And this is the coral now. So what is really happening is that all these complex structures, seaweeds, seagrasses, and animal forests are vanishing. And all these forests help us in many ways, but one of the ways in which they help the most, probably, is, among others, please, among others, it's not the only one, but it's very important to understand, in fixing the carbon that we are producing in excess, because all these organisms have the capability, like the trees in the land forest, to fix this carbon. So possibly passing from a tree forest to a grassland is not the best idea. We have to, in some way, restore. We have to make a plan in which we apply all these tools to the know-how that we have to restore at a large scale, which is not simple, but it's feasible. It's feasible if we take it seriously. It's feasible if we apply in some way a business model. It's feasible if we engage people. It's feasible if we demonstrate that can be made together with an awareness and an education program at a large scale. And what we're going to do is, this is the last slide, practically the last slide. What we want to do is explain all these things about the marine animal forest through a cost project. this European Cooperation Science and Technology Agency, which is supported by the European Union funding, and in which we will try to gather people from all over the world to just put in common some protocols, share ideas, make scientific papers regarding opinions, regarding perspectives, regarding reviews, and so on and so on, but especially, most importantly of all, engaging people and make the people understand, the persons who are not aware about the marine animal forest, what they are, why they are important, and where they are distributed, and why we should preserve these three-dimensional alive structures that are all over the planet. And I say thank you very much. And I think
Thank
that's
you.
all.
Thank you for the presentation, Sergio. I guess, I don't know, Paulo Horta, I guess we run against the time a little bit.
Okay.
So we just start at the next presentation with you,
How
or
much
you
time
have
we
any
have?
question?
Just to let me know, I need to have an idea how much I need to cut. But it's fine, huh? We can run through this new topic. We supposed to finish what time we supposed to finish? I'm saying we suppose just because I suppose that we need to finish.
I don't know. I mean, 4 presentations.
30 minutes.
Where
30 minutes more with questions, or in the total? I just, okay. In the total. Okay. So I will try to cut my presentation by half. Then we can have a time to discussions. I think that is more important than my presentation itself. So, but
I'm sorry.
Please,
I'm
sir.
just gonna say, sorry. I'd love to stay and listen to the rest of the presentations, but I took the compromise of picking someone up that's waiting for me, because it was when the 7, and yes. I have to leave now. But I'll be very happy to participate in the discussions. But all the students, everyone involved, if you have questions and issues to discuss, please email me. I don't know if there's a chat where I can put my email, and I'll be very happy to discuss anything about the marine forests with you.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We have a
Maybe
chat.
Paul, you can. I'm not sure how to write, but you can share my email, please, so that everyone can write to me.
I can share your email with the students, and will be nice to continue the discussion, and maybe take you on board of this white paper that I supposed to write with the students in the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much again, Sarah.
Thank you very much. I'll be very happy to continue collaborating with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. So I will take the function as present, and let's go. Let's go run, guys. Just because the time is running fast. Can you listen me well? Can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you. So, wow, we had very interesting talks about plants and animals. And for maybe almost half century or 1 century, this organism that we're going to talk about, the rhodolites, the coralline red algae, was considered animals. But in 1837 or 36, I don't remember, Philip realized that coralline red algae were really algae, in fact. So yeah, so here we solve the question, and let's talk about this kind of seaweeds that have a huge cell wall impregnated by carbonates of calcium with high amounts of magnesium. So they are divided in 3 main orders. We have here the corallinalis, apaledialis, and sporolithalis. Everything organized, considering right now the anatomy, the reproductive structures, but also the molecular biology, from where we are getting a lot of new and important information to solve a very complex taxonomy that was a challenge for decades for us that work with seaweed taxonomy or phylogeny or evolution, what else. But, well, we are talking about a very old group, as old as the dinosaurs. We are talking about one group that have more than 140 million years old. So yes, they were in our planet before us, before many animals and before many other plants groups that we have now. So we have a lot of to learn with this very important seaweed, red seaweed, in fact. And here we have the distribution, and we can observe in this tree, in this phylogram, or in this phylogeny, that most of the species we have today pass through a speciation process after 50 million years ago. So yes, after the big or the biggest and the last biggest extinction, mass extinction, they rise, the coralline red algae rise, and from them appear the rhodolites. So here we are with these forms that represent free living forms that can grow on the bottom of our continental shelves. I'm talking about any place around the world in soft bottoms can receive, where can grow these forms that can be more or less branched, but as one tree, they really represent substrate, niche, they change everything around them. And when they grow, as they grow very abundantly in the Brazilian coast, they represent very important and abundant ecosystem services and goods and services, of course. So here we have a bit of that. They represent substrate, food. They help to this climatic balance because they also produce the MSO. They synthesize a lot of carbonate, as I said, and they also produce oxygen. So, and if we look for these structures, we will see that they can be observed like as biofactories of a lot of goods and services. And not just on the surface. Rhodolite beds can be considered something like seed banks. In other words, inside the rhodolites, we can find germlings, cistus, different forms of different groups of organisms growing or with resistance, forms of different stages of life cycles. So yes, they can have a huge importance to their environments or to the surrounding environment. When I'm talking about these organisms, they are not just important to the benthos, they are also important to the plankton, just because we have these cycles, and many forms of resistance can be found in the benthic formations structured by rhodolite beds. In this picture, we did that in Faro with Rui Santos. We can see inside the rhodolite a kind of tree of cyanobacteria. In other words, we can have symbiotic relationships in these systems, in rhodolite beds, that we still ignore. And this interaction, these symbiotic interactions, this allobiont or holobionts can be very resilient. Here is one experiment did by the laboratory of Susan Frederick, something around 5 years ago, or almost 10 in fact right now, after the Deep Horizon disaster, where we had a huge oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And a couple years after disaster, almost all the seaweed's gone. But when we had rhodolites, from inside rhodolites, we had the spores, the germlings, the propagules, from where we have the reconstruction of this physiognomy that we have with red, green, and brown seaweed. So they really can represent important refugia for different groups and different species. And here, a bit more about the distribution of this group. We can see the huge distribution in the Brazilian coast. This is a map provided in the beginning by Foster in 2001. But Nicolas Kamenos in 2016 add some new points of distribution to this map, complementing it. And a student, Esther student, in fact, Jorge Assis and Esther was the supervisors of this student that did this very interesting rhodolite niche modeling, and this is the potential distribution of niche suitability of rhodolites around the world, from temperate to tropical populations. And what we can see is we will find suitable environments almost around all over the world. In other words, they can really represent a huge amount of immobilized carbon, as the animal forest can do. Rhodolite also can do. So if we look for this latitudinal gradient we have around the world, we can say that we should have more autotrophic dominant communities in the tropics, as we see in the hand of Gilberto Amado Filho, a very good friend that we miss a lot right now. Here is Gilberto assembling in the Espírito Santo coast, Brazilian coast, in the middle of the Brazilian coast. And here we have different physiognomies that we observe in higher latitudes, as we have in UK coast or in the French coast, in Brest, as we see here in the right corner. Oh, but what we have in Brazilian coast, just because let's dive in this environment, is this kind of huge forest of Sargassum, for example. In this case, all of these plants using as substrates the rhodolites they have. So they are hugely important. And I think Nadine, Schubert, João Silva, this guy is João Silva diving in, I think is Ilha da Madeira Island. They will take a lot of new and very important informations about what is happening through this latitudinal gradient, considering, besides the community structure, the functioning of the rhodolite beds in different latitudes, just to check if the hypothesis that was designed is correct or not. If we really can say that tropical rhodolite beds can be observed as autotrophic community, while the temperate can be recognized as a heterotrophic community. In other words, in one autotrophic community, we have a negative balance of CO2, we have more CO2 entering than releasing or release it. And in temperate area or zones, we should observe more release than sink. So, yeah. But despite of these functioning questions, we have this huge and beautiful biodiversity, from seaweeds to fishes, different groups of invertebrates, from sponge, ascidias, echinodermates, different groups of crustaceans, etc. And of course, many of these groups with biotechnological importance, and of course, innovation should be something that we should foster to develop new drugs, new ways to deal with our needs, of course, as human beings. But considering the fishery, the biodiversity that we have associated with rhodolite beds, mainly in tropical areas off Brazilian coast. Here we have Rodrigo Moura papers, very recent paper, that show that even very, very, very fished place, where we have a huge amount of fisher companies working, we have a huge biomass of important species of macrocarnivores, for instance. So as we see in this right bar, gray bar in the right corner of this graph, where we have a similar abundance of carnivores when we compare with pinnacles of coral reefs that are too much close to the coast. Or we have a significant abundance of fishes when we compare areas inside a very important MPA, marine protected area, that we have in Abrolhos. In other words, rhodolite beds can be observed as a new environment to provide this very important service to human beings, that is provide food. So yeah, rhodolite beds are getting more and more important, much more we know about it. So as I said, we have more biomass of rhodolites, and of course we also have more biomass of associated species of autotrophic associated species in tropical areas, as we see in this graph. Fernando de Noronha is a Brazilian tropical oceanic island, while we have in the other corner these two islands, Deserta and RAN means Arvoredo, Rancho Norte in Arvoredo Island. Rhodolite beds we have here in Florianopolis. Well, we can see these differences in the abundance of rhodolites, but also in the abundance of epiphyte when we compare what we have in Bahia, or when we compare what we have of biomass in Espírito Santo with Arvoredo and Deserta Island. The diversity of species associated with these environments are much higher in intermediate or transitional zones, as we have here in the Brazilian coast. And looking about the abundance, just to have an idea, the niche suitability of rhodolite beds in Brazil can reach something around 230,000 kilometers squares, what is equivalent to UK area. In other words, is a huge area where we can find these organisms. And if that is true, the amount of carbon that they can sink per year is also huge. This is Hayden Icamenus did that evaluation in 2015, showing that they can sink this free-living form of coralline crustals algae can sink something around 1.6 billion tons of carbon per year. And these are the parameters or the environmental factors that can drive the functioning of the systems. Temperature, of course, they can suffer considering high temperature associated with ocean warming. Light at the bottom, so everything that was discussed here regarding the change that pollution can impose to coastal or marine environments, the amount of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphate, and of course the current speed. All that together represent a multi-stressor scenario that can drive the carbon sequestration or the rhodolite bed functioning. So, considering the distribution, the vertical distribution we have in Brazil, we can highlight that most of our rhodolite beds should be found around 50 meters deep. And of course, as I said, the factors associated with the presence or absence of rhodolites are related with temperature, availability of irradiance, the speed of currents, and of course, the availability of nutrients. But when we look to the biomass of these groups, we observe that the amount of nutrients is more important. But well, if nutrients from one side in some levels can be good, can help rhodolites to grow more and calcify more, etc. When we have excess of nutrients or excess or any other kind of pollutants, we can observe these factors as stressors, and the rhodolite beds and all the associated community will suffer. So here we have some pictures showing the water trawling, bottom trawling, dredging, ports. We are working on that right now in south of Brazil. We are extending the length of our beach because coastal erosion, and we are also discussing in Brazil the extension of oil exploitation fields, oil and gas exploitation fields. So unfortunately, we are working to increase the local stressors in our coastal and marine environments. As we can see here in this map, almost in all Brazilian coasts, we have available blocks of concession of oil and gas. And right now, October 7, we will observe another round where 92 blocks will be sold, and all the environmental information is not available. So we have no idea the vulnerability of the areas that are under consideration right now. But what we know after the big disaster we had in 2019 is that most of the Brazilian coast, and of course we must say that most of the neighbor countries or environments are under threat, because a huge spill as observed in the past, deep horizons, a good example, can reach very, very, very far. And we are talking about oil, a very, very important and toxic pollutant. So this is something that we must discuss deep during this event. And I think a letter from our spring school to our society will be really very welcome to put some light on this problem. Just because we are discussing here about the possibility, the very plausible possibility of a big ecocide in our very, very close future. And we have all the big companies involved with this bite. In other words, as Sergio said this morning, there is a lot of hypocrisy, and we need to talk about sustainability. In fact, just because we have alternatives to oil and gas. And what happened in the very recent past of Brazil with the disaster of Rio Doce, that had a huge impact on rhodolite beds of Brazilian coast, is something that we must learn. Just because we had a huge environmental disaster, but also human disaster. This is what is happening with original people from the neighborhood of Rio Doce, without future, without perspective, because what we can do with this kind of natural environment is kill everything. So just very shortly, yes, the mud of rhodolite of Rio Doce can have a huge impact, reducing a lot the photosynthesis of rhodolites in species like Lithophyllum margaritide, for instance, are very beautiful rhodolite species. When we observe the impact on net production, we can see that if we do nothing, they will die. But if we intervene and if we manage the impact, if we clean the surface of the rhodolite, they can recover a bit. In other words, if we do something regarding our moment right now, we can restore, or we can provide a new chance for our next future. So if we introduce in this very complicated equation, warming with the more intense and frequent heat waves, marine heat waves, we have ocean acidification, as Sergio said, we have the sea level rises, all that. And of course, we also have more frequent and severe storms. All that represent very important global stressors that can put together, or must be put together in this very complex scenario of multiple stressors, where we should start to produce some information to have a bit more about what kind of impact we should have. But when Nadine did this experiment, she observed it, and other students, she observed that yes, combined the pollution represented by the nutrient increase and the warming, the combined stressors produced a reduction in the nutrient filtration or absorption, a release of nitrogen, in fact, and a release of carbon, and a reduction of zinc of carbonate. In other words, we also can start to feed climate change with more CO2, in other words. So we can accelerate all these global stressors that are under discussion very broadly in our planet right now. So if we continue in this line, in this path, we should be responsible by the contraction of millions of kilometers square of rhodolite beds, and we will lose all the goods and services that this ecosystem produce to human beings. And I think with that, I should start to end saying that yes, we should do something, and we need to start increasing our conservation capacity. We need more MPAs. And in this paper, we map where we can find some priority areas, considering, for example, also the presence of rhodolite beds. Considering all this map of threats we have here in your left corner, in the middle map, we have all these areas. In most of them, we have rhodolite beds as one of the targets that must be preserved or inside one MPA. So yes, we need to think in one planet that have just one health, and rhodolite is part of this health. And as we are in the middle of this pandemic, And in Brazil, we have this very, very handsome guy, Zé Gotinha, a guy that represents the vaccination program, the Brazilian vaccination program. We think that nature-based solution, a global program, should represent the global vaccine to the climatic and biodiversity crisis. Thank you very much for your attention. And here we have some take-home messages, but most of them are saying we do have solutions. We just need to foster One Health concept. Well, everything here was produced by a huge team, and I'm sorry to run too fast. Especially, I'm so sorry, girls that are trying to translate us. Maya, in this moment, I'm sorry, Maya. Well, guys, let's discuss. Thank you very much.
We have some questions here, and I guess all of these questions was about all the presentations, but feel free to respond to anyone. And the first question is from Marina Alves. And question, there is any study that estimates the carbon sequestration from seagrass and give the valuation of this ecosystem in the blue carbon way?
I can try to answer this. Yes, there are many studies that investigate the carbon sequestration and actually the carbon sequestration, the economic value of the carbon sequestration is relatively easy to calculate because there are values already established for that, which is, by the way, very low value. I mean, carbon is still very cheap around the world, meaning that the production of CO2 it's still very cheap. In fact, if you calculate the value of seagrasses, the seagrass ecosystem services, only based on carbon, it will be a very, very cheap value. So any big company could pay and extract several hectares, no problem. The question here is that, I mean, the carbon is not the only ecosystem service that seagrasses provide, and also there is, I mean, there is things that have really no value. I mean, when you destruct ecosystems, full ecosystems, I mean, there is a danger in transforming everything on money. I mean, there's a danger. I mean, it's important to have a value, an economic value for people to understand, but it's dangerous to reduce the value of the ecosystems to money, to dollars or euros or whatever, because there are things that just cannot be valorized by establishing a value. Yeah, but
I guess
yes, it can be done.
I guess her's afraid of bargain chip, to use the ecosystem like a bargain chip. If you protect some areas, some ecosystems, some carbon, now is carbon, it's another currency in the green market. Thank you for your answer. And some congratulations here. And Joanna, and congratulations for your speech. And Frank Foster, rotology exploration is a very interesting topic. Thank you for the talk. And another question is from Jones. How can we include seagrass in regulated carbon markets? Is there a way to create a standardized methodology to measure their carbon?
yes, there is rules, there is norms to do that, and they are already developed, and they are there. The thing is that the carbon market, there is projects that are on the carbon market for like reconstruction projects, but they are more concentrated on mangroves and salt marshes. The seagrasses, they are not still done. I mean, even though there are rules to calculate the value and the carbon market value, they are established, and you can there is companies that can certify the carbon market value of seagrasses, and so all the rules are there. And but to my knowledge, there is no projects still that use seagrasses on the carbon market.
Rui, I have a question for you and also for Paul in this sense. More than a question, just a thought. What do you think about the trade of this carbon from, for example, Fiji Islands to Canada, from United States to Solomon Islands? Because you all know that once the market started, just a few years ago, it started to be something like a market in which you say, well, buy me some carbon credits. And I will, what do you think about that?
Well, it is positive that the big companies invest in poor countries to protect the like the blue carbon ecosystems, right? But there is also the problem of the economic development, right? I mean, to do that, you have to do it in a way that local people can gain from that, can gain and can develop their economy and their wealth and improve economic situation. And sometimes that does not happen, right? Yeah, because the developed countries destroyed their ecosystems and they got rich because of that, right? And now you think, oh, okay, but the poor countries now they want to do the same. Why can't they do the same? I mean, but the global crisis is so huge that we cannot afford that anymore, right? So this has to be a global decisions and global management. Yeah, so it's a complicated issue. That
it's very complex.
But you see, just contributing a bit with that, I see right now about that question and oil spill exploitation, the remaining reserves we have. The Brazilian is actually in this point. Of course, we can. Of course, well, the oil is here. It's 100 kilometers from Floripa. Why not? Well, it's there. Let's exploit it and burn everything and gain the money that we can gain with that. Is honest in theory, but I think COP26 must be the table where, oops, wait a minute. Okay, yes, you can do it, but can we avoid it? How much can the planet pay to poor countries, especially to poor countries, to the more vulnerable countries of our planet, to preserve their forests, to preserve the blue carbon in the mud? Just because if we destroy everything, we will lose everything. So, and of course, how much we can receive, for example, fostering the ecological transition or the green transformation. I think this is possible. Sergio, I think we just need to put our difference by side, and we have a lot of differences, and try to see as a single planet, a human being in a single planet, in fact. And maybe with this perspective of very huge tsunami coming, and this tsunami, I'm talking about the climatic crisis. Another wave will come with the biodiversity crisis. In other words, we have a huge problem in our back coming very fast. So I think COP26 is maybe the final opportunity we have as human beings to start a global transformation of perspective, of change of our way of life. I don't know, maybe I'm too much optimist, but I still believe that it's possible to foster this maturity to the next COP.
Rich said something that was very interesting to me before, and is that we can't just look at ecosystems as a transformed ecosystem in money. 1997, I think, or 1983, I don't remember, Costanza made this paper in which he started to stabilize the concept of the ecosystem services. And most of the ecosystem services were used to just say, well, what about if I destroyed the mangrove and then I make shrimp aquaculture to make something, to say something, or crops or whatever? And what is the benefit of per hectare of the ecosystem? What is, and you cannot do that. And we demonstrated many times in a recent work that we made in 2017 in University of Salento, Ceará. We demonstrated 78% of the people, when they were asked in a special anthropac program to make interviews, okay, and they say, think about mangroves, and please tell me what is the first thing that you have in your mind when I say mangrove, okay, say the mangrove. And 78% of the people, the first word was tudo, which is all, 78%. So almost all the people was thinking about the mangrove, about the link of nature with their lives. Of course, the people was from the local area, was not from Fortaleza or was not from Rio de Janeiro. But tudo, we were a little bit astonished about that. And you cannot put economic value to tudo, because you cannot make an economic value of what is happening in the mind of the people that needs the mangrove to survive, not only from the economic point of view, but also from the spiritual point of view. And yes, I know that people say, oh yeah, you are now talking about this kind of cultural things, blah, blah. But it's more than that. And I think that indeed we do need this kind of ecosystems as healthy as we can for many reasons, but also for our own health status as humans, you know. So it's important to have to keep in mind this kind of message from my point of view, because it's oil prospection. Well, but so what? It would last how many years? 10 years? 15 years? Because if you see, for example, the perspectives of the oil exploitation from the International Energy Agency, and I think they are not anarchist, communist, or whatever, they are extremely conservative people. They said basically that most of the big companies of petroleum are not any more making prospections, because there is no more a viable fuel in the sense of what we were thinking in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. It's done. I mean, we have petroleum, but so what don't we have to think in another way, a little bit different? Don't make this kind of exploitation, adapt our lives to a less consuming world, in a less consuming thing. But it's very difficult to understand for everybody, even for the people that is very aware about that. It's very difficult to do that. It's not easy.
Yeah, can I add? Yeah, I want to say something about value. When we talk about value, people think about money, but value is not money. I mean, we should think about value as it's a wider concept than money. I mean, what's the value of happiness, right? What's the value of happiness? Can you make a value? Can you put the value on that? With the ecosystem services, the same. What's the value of having seahorses? You cannot translate this into dollars. So the value of the ecosystems must be studied and must be shown. But we have to be careful. Value is not money. Yeah, money is only a small perspective of the value. So yeah, so I agree with you, Sergio.
Do you mind? I just would like to show, just because where is the Frank Foster said that rural exploration is a very interesting topic. Thank you. Well, let's try to show a bit about it, just because when we have dredging or bottom trawling, we have almost the same thing that as Sergio showed us, that we observe right now in the Brazilian Amazon forests, where we have fire and people cutting down giant trees. So as we see in these photographies, here we have the control with beautiful rhodolite forest. We can see the shadow of the canopy in this perspective here. Here we have in my mouse, you will see in the arrow the canopy with the red colors of the rhodolites, and here the black, the blue carbon that Rui Santos showed us in his presentation before. Well, when we have moderate dredging or exploration or bottom trawling, we lost canopy. We are producing something like grasslands, as Sergio said and showed us. And we observe that we are losing biomass, we are losing carbon. And when this dredge is high, the intensity is high, well, then we lose almost everything and we lose a lot of carbon. So we are losing values that we cannot, we cannot put some numbers on it, but it's our future that we are losing, now, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the point to sustainability, to trying to bring this concept of value, this concept of progress with the maintenance of the nature. I have another questions here. Natalia Boleto. Oh, sorry, Natalia Belotto. Question: Amazon, Cerrado, Pantanal also suffer daily area loss. Why is it still possible for most people not to link these losses to possibility irreversible economic, social, environment damage? How people don't link the environment damage for this loss?
don't know if you want to start with this. Well, if you don't want to start, I will try to contribute. Well, here in Florianópolis, we have the Lagoa da Conceição, place where we visit, where Sergio is right now. And in January of this year, we lost all the services and goods that Lagoa da Conceição provided because of one accident, one disaster. We have a dump of sewage was completely discharged inside the lagoon. After a couple of weeks, tons of fishes appeared die on the beach. And of course, the water was not possible to enter on. So in the middle of our summer, so economic values, religious perspective, everything was lost in a single moment. So even after experience all that, I see inside government and companies involved with the disaster, no effective actions. So I think education is the unique solution for sustainable change, just because we need change and the actual or the current generation seems are not open to change, seems me.
Can I add to that? There is a role, a very important role that the scientists can have in this issue, and this is what we are doing here actually, which is communicating the science, explaining the scientific basis of why we have to conserve and preserve the ecosystems. Why is this ecosystem important? People, I have this experience in Rio Formosa Lagoon some years ago. People would call the seagrasses here, como in Portuguese, erva daninha, meaning that it was very bad because there was a lot of mud, and mud is not good. It doesn't smell well. It's very difficult to walk on it. And so people had this idea that the seagrasses here were not good, were something that could be destroyed and no problem. So, and actually this view changed completely in 10, 15 years. And the change was because of us, because we, along the years, we explained and we explained why it was important. And we did many dissemination, and, we talked to people. And what is interesting now, which is that the clam farms that would usually say that, now they are one of the most protective guys and women, actually the women, very protective of the seagrasses, and they now defend them. And so this is a local example of how scientists can have the duty to do this, to explain, and we need to have time to do it, and we must do it because it's worthwhile. It's time that we spend. We don't publish papers during that time, but probably our action is much more important to the world than publishing a couple of more papers that no one is going to read.
Look, in a worldwide vision, in this case in Brazil, last week, I mean, I'm not aware of the environmental problems in depth in Brazil, okay? But here there is a problem now, right now, about energy, about the price of the energy, because most of the energy, or a great proportion of energy here, is coming from the hydroelectrical power And now most of the dams are 10, 11, 18% there is a heavy drop. But the heavy drop is not only about climate change, or they were extraordinarily good in one BBC program that is centered in Brazil, talking about the destruction of the ecosystems that are around the rivers, like the Caatinga, for example. Extracting all these trees that are deep, they have a very, very, very deep roots inside. They destroy the possibility to maintain the water inside the system. And they substitute by, of course, crops which have small roots. A very simple concept that now starts to, move the people, because the people has no energy, or the people that has to live making whatever, they're making couscous or selling things on the streets, or they understand that they have to pay more and more and more for this electricity nowadays. And this is not a simple punctual problem. This will last because you destroy the system that make possible this kind of retention of water. And for me, it's surprising because, of course, these people that made the crops were not people that was ignorant. They know exactly what they were doing. They were substituting one thing, one potential ecosystem by another one, which is a monoculture or whatever, it's the same. And you know it because this kind of information is at hand for more than 40, 50 years. It's not new. So I agree with you, and I told you in the other talk, we do have to take action as scientists, make steps, and then try to be speak much more louder and take more action in this case to just try to make things completely different.
If I can give a suggestion, like a student, if we're in a student environment, I think that we have to improve some skills on the students too, or we have to give to students that still more in field and take the action, and a little less from the students that just know to write a great paper. They just know to do analytic technical in laboratory, because this breaks some barriers from the academy, from the student, from their families, from their society. And I think that's a most complex environment and most complex situation, but it's a possible thing to do, that you give some give some improve to this kind of student that is taking the action really. To another, if you want to talk, Paulo.
No, I was reading the José Vitor Machado Rodrigues comment. How can we break the barriers between science and politics so actions could be better taken regarding more sustainable ways of living? It's a bit of what you were saying, Belchior, but I also think what you are doing in Ceará is great. There, guys, they have the scientists that work inside government. So we have a bridge. Professor Sergio is there. Professor Marcelo, that will be with us tomorrow, is there inside one government, working side by side with politicians. Here in south of Brazil, we start right now the Parliamentary Network of Environment or something like that. Rede Parlamentar Ambientalista in Portuguese. And well, it's working. We are writing laws. We are writing or helping these guys to write laws, to try to fiscalize better the executive. Anyway, I think this this approach is happening, but I'm really afraid about time. So I think we must dedicate much more attention to this real and necessary moment to reach COP26 with a different situation, different balance, of course. This is what we are trying to work here in our group. And I think our white paper that we're going to write with you, students and colleagues, I think can have a very important role in this moment. So if we don't have more questions or comments, I think we can run to end because we are more or less half hour delay. I'm right?
Okay. One last question from Carolina Bracho. Is there no mechanism to accelerate carbon sequestration, immobilization, and which ecosystems would be most likely to apply it?
I don't think there are magical receipts, but perhaps following nature and what the nature is used to do is good. Conservation is one thing, and the other, of course, is making a good restoration program. I think we do have the tools, but we have to really apply them. So I wouldn't be very. I don't think it would be a very good idea to just make, for example, genetic experiments and so on that the people is making. I think that there are rules in nature to enhance carbon sequestration and to make very good restoration programs. Something like with nature-based solutions, making this kind of approach. I guess that we do have the tools, but we have to just start to apply them.
Rui,
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I think the best mechanism is to preserve what's there. This is the most fantastic mechanism, is to provide the conditions for the ecosystems to be healthy. That's the first thing. It's the cheapest one. The reconstruction, and we destroyed so much. I mean, the blue carbon ecosystems around the world, the mangroves, salt marshes, seagrasses, and also seaweeds, but they have disappeared at alarming rates. So we have to invest in the reconstruction, the restoration. And restoration is very, very expensive. I mean, restoration of mangroves is the cheapest one. And restoration of seagrasses is the most expensive one. But we have to do it. We have to do it because the problem of the CO2 in the atmosphere is that we can cut the emissions, and that's something that it's definitely you have to do. But we also have to improve the sequestration. It's not only to cut the emissions, but to improve the sequestration, because cutting the emissions only it's not enough. So we have to improve sequestration. And unfortunately, the situation is so bad that we have to invest a lot of money in the reconstruction. And we have, I mean, nowadays it's very expensive, but with science and technology development, it will be cheaper. So a lot of investment should go into the reconstruction of ecosystems, and in this particular case, blue carbon ecosystems. And the United Nations already understood that, because we just started the decade of ecosystem restoration, right? It's more focused on land and on terrestrial forests. But as we can see, the coastal blue carbon ecosystems are more effective in sequestering carbon than forests. And so So it's better to invest on those. Of course, the area covered by forests is much higher. But anyway, we have. This is a good place to invest because the sequestration rates are very, very high.
Just to finish, guys, I think this, if we foster this kind of actions, we can try to feed an alternative regenerative economy. In other words, solving problems, reconstruction, remediation, everything can represent with the state investment, everything can represent opportunities to generate incomes. And with that, well, put to movement a new economy that is based in the solutions that they are providing. So I think with this regenerative and distributive economies, we can solve fast all these problems we have. I think 1 decade is possible to start. So we need to start.
Yes, thank you.
So that's it.
Thank you all.
So we need thanks everything that is with us until now. So sorry for all the technical problems. We always need to thank Adriana and Maya for the translation. Adriana is still there working on the translation to the guys. We had today, just this afternoon, 105 attendants in the Portuguese room, and let me check here, and 329 attendants in the English room. So wow, man, almost
not bad. Very, very productive day. And please keep your brain warm during this night. Tomorrow morning we will be together again, and well, hold in your seats. Join us. Good and productive discussions tomorrow. Let's continue in this very bloom of our spring school. Thank you very much for coming, for staying with us. See you tomorrow. Rui, my friend, a big hug. Stay well and go home now. After that, well, how do you explain that to your wife? Oh, I was in a talk.
It's recorded. It's recorded.
That's it. That's it. Everybody knows.
Lena is here in Mozambique also. She's here.
Oh, so he knows.
He's looking at the streaming. He's looking now on YouTube and saying, well, okay.
Okay, that's it. That's true. He was not in the bar. That's it. So thank you very much. Thank you all for your attention to be with us. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.